Alright, back for another day of disassembly. So hopefully today we're pulling the blower itself. I basically just have to pull the little elbow off that's at the rear of the blower. That's what feeds from the throttle body into the supercharger. As soon as that is off, there's a couple bolts at the front of the blower and then it should come right out. Alright, this thing should pretty much come up and out. Like so. Look at that. One boosty boy. Alright, so the blower is obviously out. We are finding more oil residue in here, so we're starting to wonder if that has something to do with the heat issue as well. So we're going to do some investigating. We're still going to pressure test the charge air coolers. We're going to be checking the blower itself and seeing basically if there's maybe an oil leak somewhere in the blower. But yeah, there's a lot of investigative work that will be coming later in this series to track down exactly what was going on. So the blower is out, the charge air coolers are off. The charge air coolers are just held on by T30 Torx bolts. They're a pretty low torque spec, so they came off nice and easy. The back ones are a little fiddly, but not too bad. So yeah, those are out, and now we're starting to get into uncharted territory because we still have to go deeper than I've gone before. So next up, I think we're going to be possibly working on maybe the fuel rails, and then you know, maybe probably removing this little elbow at the back. I feel like I left that in last time, so I think that's part of maybe the EGR system. So I'm gonna have to disconnect some of that, and it already looks like a little bit of fun back there. Now I did order new belts. I ordered the Serpentine belt, and I also ordered the supercharger belt, and I got a new thermostat just in case. All three of those components I got from the brand Gates. I've heard good things about them, so I figured why not spend a little bit extra on them, especially because it's going to be under more strain than a stock vehicle would be under. So those should be coming in the next handful of days as well for when we put this thing back together. Because to be honest, this thing does look a little bit tired. So today is a shorter day for me, so I'm just going to get as far as I can on removing the elbow that connects the throttle body to the back of the blower. I can't guarantee I'll get the whole thing off, but we'll see. I'm just going to start taking bolts out there. There's a couple brackets and things that seem to get in the way of the four mounting bolts that actually bolt it down to the block. So just start removing stuff and see what we find. So this is the elbow I'm talking about. Throttle body sits up there, blower attaches over there. And this is the EGR right here. So I'm deciding whether I want to undo the EGR pipe at the throttle body, which, you know, will have seen less heat soak than these bolts here, or nuts I should say. Had some bad experiences with those things being super stiff on my Crown Vic. So I'm hesitant to try these, but they're a little more accessible than the bottom bolt on this one. So I'll figure out which way I want to approach, but I'm gonna have to undo one side of that for sure. And this is that bracket I'm talking about. You see these right here? They look like a 10 mil and then maybe a couple of 8 mils. This little triangle shaped bracket here. And that has to come off because the rear bolt, which you can't even see with the camera here, it's another one of these, but it sits basically right where my fingernail is there. I can't reach that until I get this bracket off. And we have a pretty similar situation on this side as well. Front bolt is accessible, but the back appears to be blocked by another bracket. So this is just going to be a bunch of fiddly, annoying stuff, and I'm just going to go slow and steady and work on, you know, stripping stuff away. And once I figure out a good method, of course, I'll update you guys on kind of the approach that I took and what worked, or if I have an annoying method that takes forever and then I find a better way, I'll let you know the better way instead of doing my slow method. So, fingers crossed. Alright, so I lied. So on the XJR, you have the risers that adapt the charge air coolers to the block, because it's the same basic block that the XJ8 has. And I realized it was probably easier to remove those first before messing with this stuff at the back, just to gain some extra clearance back there. So you get your 10 mil bolts that are actually holding the adapters on, but I would suggest leaving those in place until you've removed these little guys, which are the brackets that hold the loom for your fuel injectors. So remove those, get those out of the way. You're going to need to remove this little guy from the valve cover here. And then there's one 8mm bracket that mounts at the back of the adapter on the driver's side if you're in the US. And then pretty much at the front of the adapter, right about where my finger is, you'll see a little blue cap. And here, I'll even show you. That's basically the Schrader valve that you use to bleed off the pressure. So your fuel system may still be under pressure, so you just want to make sure you bleed off the pressure before you undo the feed and return lines. And then basically these are just 8mm bolts that go in the back there, and then a little O-ring, so you have to wiggle them out. And of course, as I'm sure you guessed, a bunch of fuel will come pouring out the moment you do that, so just be ready for that. But we got those removed, and we actually removed both as an assembly. We left the crossover at the front there, just to keep it easy. And yeah, so that's what we got out. And I think that's going to be our wrap-up point for tonight, so we'll pick back up another day. Back for another day here at the shop. We are digging back into removing that throttle body elbow, and I've already actually done a little bit. Didn't want to make you guys watch everything I was doing, but I'll walk you through what I did real quick. So on the driver's side, there's this bracket right here, and I just removed the two 10mm bolts that were holding it into this plate piece down here. So those two bolts that were down there came out. I also disconnected this little hose guy here off of this barbed metal fitting. And it's similar to the hard lines up top. You just squeeze this and you kind of get the collar just past that. And I actually used like a little screwdriver just gently to pop it because it does have a little O-ring in there. So I think that's what I've done so far on this side. I need to disconnect this little hose connection as well because this goes into the back of the throttle body too. And then I unplugged this plug with James's help because it was a bit of a bear. And then on this side, I did the scariest thing ever, and I took the EGR off at the exhaust side, but it actually behaved. So these were 13mm nuts, took those off, that's no problem. So now, oh yeah, and then on this side, there was one bolt, which I believe was the top one here, which goes into this hole, but it's the top hole in the bracket. Also 10mm, same as the other side. And basically I took that out. That's what freed the whole elbow up. So now all I have to do is basically remove that one hose on the other side and then pop this little guy out. It's pretty tight in there, but I think it just takes a little bit of pressure and it should just slide out. All right, so we have the elbow removed, and I have the fuel injector harnesses just tucked in the middle here. With them disconnected, they can just rest out of the way. They also share the mounting for the knock sensors, which you can see there. So now we are on to removing the valve covers. If you're feeling adventurous, you could choose to disconnect. I guess there's a wire low down here that goes to the alternator, and on this side I believe it goes to like the AC compressor. You know, you could choose to disconnect those, and that would let you actually move the entire harness all the way back. I tried to get in there and it wasn't working for me, so I said screw it. So we're going to pull this valve cover first, I think, and see what we're dealing with. Time to finally see what a dual overhead cam Jag cylinder head looks like. So quick note when you're dealing with the valve cover, you're going to see these bolts first that go around the outside. They're very obvious. They are 10mm. And there's this neat little thing where they actually stay in place. They're not going to just come right out. But tried to remove it after loosening those. Discovered there are also two more in the center here, so make sure you remove those. Made another attempt to remove it, and then realized these are not just studs, they actually thread into the cylinder head. So the ones that look like studs, they're actually also bolts that are holding that valve cover on. Make sure you remove those. Alright, so this valve cover is now off, and on this side there's one extra consideration, which is the dipstick. It does mount on this, there's a stud down here. It was a little bit fiddly, but actually it does just pop out of the block. It was just a little stiff on ours, but a little bit of a tug, it popped right out. And yeah, now we basically have the valve covers off. It's time to start working on the front of the motor. Woohoo! So next up, I'm probably going to remove the fan assembly here, which if memory serves, I think is just two bolts at the top here. There's a plug which goes somewhere into Narnia around there. But yeah, unplug your fans. And then I believe it is just resting in place at the bottom, but I will double check that as I pull it out. But that's not a today problem. That's probably next time I come here because we're running out of time. This was a short one, but chipping away a little bit each day is definitely helping. All right, y'all, today we are back. We're working on removing the front end accessories off of the Jag here, and that'll get us one step closer to pulling the cylinder heads. The goal is to try and get it to where we're close to being able to pull the timing cover. Don't have a super long day today, so I may not get it all done in this one sitting. But again, the goal is to get as many of these front end accessories off that are in the way of removing the timing cover. So, as mentioned in the previous set of videos, I should say, we're going to be removing this fan assembly. That's pretty easy, so I'm going to work on snipping these zip ties and undoing the harness, which plugs in basically just at the bottom of each of the fans here, and then moving it out of the way. Alright, so we got the plugs undone from the fans and tucked out of the way here, and we got those top two bolts removed, and now it literally just tips forward ever so slightly and lifts right out. Just try not to drag it on your radiator. Next up, we're going to remove this tensioner, which is for the supercharger belt, and that'll let us actually get the belt and the tensioner out of the way, because you can't really get the belt the whole way off while that's still on there. Alright, well these are out now. So it's one 13mm bolt right in the middle, and then you see these two little studs. Those are the locating pins, so they basically kind of slot into a section on the block, or I believe we're one of the accessories down there, and essentially that's what locates the correct geometry for this. So, we'll keep going. And albeit it wasn't completely trashed, my supercharger belt was a little bit tired, so we got a replacement. It's a Gates Micro V1. These things have a pretty good reputation, so I'm hoping that will combat our belt slip using our stock tensioner, but if need be, we may need to service or look at the tensioner, but it's very easy to take off, so we're gonna cross our fingers on that one and see how that goes when we put the car back together. Now, I did discover on this idler pulley here, I actually have, it's gonna be tough to show you, but I have a little bit of play, and you know, you definitely don't want that on a piece of the circuit that's, you know, pretty important. So I think you can replace just the bearing in these. I'm going to look into that because like a lot of these specific parts, I've had a little trouble finding the actual full pulley itself. But yeah, so that's interesting. Looks like two 8mm bolts here, and it looks like you may need to get like a ring spanner or something on that one because it's tucked behind this guy here. So we're going to get this off next, and then we'll move on to the main accessories. Alright, so I got that loosened up with that ring spanner there, and now it's finger tight. Just take it the rest of the way out, and then we'll work on the more accessible one. I almost led you all astray. There's a third one hiding right down here, also 8mm. Alright, I was able to finesse that out of there without removing this belt just yet, because the important thing I want to remind you guys is, if it is your first time working on this type of engine, just take a moment to map out how the belts go. It may have a diagram on the underside of the hood, but just in case, have a record of it so you can see exactly the path that the belt takes. That way when you go to put it back together, it is a lot easier just to get it right first try. So this video is going to serve as mine, but just take a photo, save it somewhere that you'll be able to find it. That's always a great idea. I did that a lot on my Crown Vic, and it saved my butt. Now, I haven't actually worked on this belt before, but this is the tensioner for it right here. And it's not like the other style where you actually just put the wrench, like the ratchet handle into it. I don't see the square for that. So I think this might be like a 15 or something. I'm gonna try and actually put a socket on this and see if I can lean on it this way without starting to undo that idler. So we'll see how that goes. Now, being a dummy, I grabbed a 3/8 ratchet socket. So I just grabbed this little extension here, which is a jack handle, but you could also use a breaker bar for this. But it is looking like this is gonna do the trick. So, I need both hands for this, but basically, I'm going to lean on this, get the tension off the belt, and I'll probably pop the belt off of this top pulley here, because that's the most accessible. Alright, we have success. I just popped it over the top one here, and while I was still holding it, I actually took it off of the alternator pulley as well. Figured that was a smart idea. So now, we are just unthreading the rest of the belt here, and we're going to pull it out. Alright, now that belt is out, we have a bit of a clear picture of what we're actually working with here. So, you can really see where the timing cover begins and ends. So my immediate assessment here is the water pump, at least the pulley has to come off, but I'm probably going to pull the whole pump just to make sure that we have the later style one with the metal impeller. If we don't, I'll get one of those. There's nothing wrong with one that's plastic impeller if you buy it new and install it yourself, but if yours is the original plastic impeller one, you should 100% just replace it while you're in here. And, you know, again, if this doesn't already have metal impellers, one way or the other, I am replacing it. It looks like I'll probably have to remove the tensioner because it does kind of get in the way of the timing cover here. And, of course, my absolute favorite, the crank pulley. I'm going to have to pull that as well. It's always so much fun pulling crank pulleys. Yay. All right, and we're back. So, yeah, those three bolts come out. That lets you access the bolts that actually attach the water pump to the top front of the engine here. So that is the next step. We're going to pop the water pump off. Now, I took a look down inside this little water neck guy here and saw that we have a water level still inside the block, which is higher than the water pump. So something tells me if I don't do something about that first, I may actually end up with water pouring out of here when I take it off. So I'm actually going to remove the water neck because it looks like the level is below this, and then do something to try and get the water out of the block, or at least lower, so that it doesn't all come pouring out when I do this. You don't have to do that if you're okay with it just dumping on the ground, or ideally into a bucket because it's coolant, not water. But yeah, that's my plan, is I'm going to try and get it out of here first before getting this off. Alright, so this is held on by those 3 T30 Torx, and it looks like it's got an O-ring here, and I can't tell if this is actually the O-ring and it's just very smushed, or if that is just a bead of silicone, but I believe my new kit should have an O-ring to go in this, so yeah, one way or the other we'll clean that out and we'll get an O-ring in there, and now I can work on getting that water out of there. Alright, I got as much of the coolant out of there as I could. Basically, there's probably still going to be a little that comes out of here, but I was able to get a good amount of it out simply by taking a clean rag, stuffing it in there and soaking it up, and then basically just wringing it out. It took me 3 goes around of that, and it got to the point where no more was coming out. And I was able to actually get it most of the way inside the water pump here. So, I mean, we've got it down to a decent level. Yes, some coolant's going to come out, I know that, but it's not going to be as bad as it was if I just left it. So for the water pump itself, it looks like we're dealing with these 4 8mm bolts right there, and then it looks like 2 10mm here. So these are the 4 8mm that I took out, and I can't tell if this is anti-seize or some sort of sealant. I mean, it looks like anti-seize to me because it's still wet, and it's kind of that silver color. Oh yeah, look at that. That's anti-seize. Okay, so there we go. These had anti-seize on them from what I can tell, but I will do some research and just make sure these don't need to be sealed. No water's coming out, so that's a good sign. Now, interestingly enough, these 10mm are actually short. They look like they just hold the front and back covers of the water pump together. So I'm actually going to thread these back in and just do them finger tight for now, because it looks like this thing's probably just being held on by the gasket or something like that. So I'm going to try and pop it off without removing these 10mm first, see if I can pull it off as an assembly. Man, there is always one hiding. Look at that, one more 8mm right at the very bottom. Didn't even see it. So even with removing that bottom one, it's still resisting me. So I'm actually going to take those 2 10mm off, and we're going to pull the front cover of the water pump off, see if there's maybe something inside of there holding the back cover on. So this came apart pretty easy. And the good news is, it has a metal impeller. The strange news is, there's some sort of buildup on this thing. And it's got me worried that at some point maybe this thing had the wrong coolant put in it, because you're not supposed to mix the orange stuff and the green stuff. And I'm wondering if some of that, gross looking crap there is maybe the gelling that occurs. So we'll see. But I can clean that off, and again, the water pump seems to be in perfect shape, which does lend credence to the previous owner having done the correct thing and replacing this with a good one. Still don't see any extra way of pulling the back cover off here. Predictably, some more water did come out, but that was to be expected. So, yeah, we're just going to kind of leave that in place for the moment, and we'll come back to it. And you can just see more of that crud, whatever it is, right at the bottom there as well. Looks like it got between the 2 layers. So, definitely going to have to do a little bit of investigation to see what that's all about. But we are now on to removing the other tensioner here, and it looks like it's just another 15mm, and it's probably going to be a similar concept, a couple of those locating pins. So we're going to crack that and remove it now. I lied. It was a 13. Now, for good measure, we're going to remove that idler as well, the one that's kind of part of the bracket that's holding on the alternator here, and that one is a 15. It just looks like it's in the way of one of the bolts that holds on the timing cover, so might as well remove it, get it out of the way. Alright, that guy felt like he had a little bit of blue thread locker on it or something, so we'll have to remember to put that back that way when we do it. And this probably has a specific torque spec, being a pulley, because it does seat a bearing, so you don't want to over-tighten something like this. So I'll do some research and figure out what this is supposed to be at. And if you followed the channel for a while, you know that this is going to be a perfect opportunity for me to go through and clean up and detail every single one of these parts, including the hardware, before it goes back in to make this engine look as shiny and brand new as possible. Very truly, while you are in there, it just makes sense to do it. It's the only time you're going to be able to. So if you're doing this like as a functional thing, you just got to get back on the road, of course you can skip it. But when you're doing performance upgrades, when you got the time, always makes sense to take the time to clean up the hardware, clean up the pieces, get them as clean as you possibly can, because once it's back together, you can't really reach it again. And not that I ever really plan on selling this car, but if I were to, having an engine bay that clean is a real big selling point to a lot of people. It kind of confirms that you've done the services you said you have, even though anyone that buys from me can just watch these videos. But that being said, you know, it just makes a buyer feel a little more comfortable when they open the hood and it's spotless. I mean, they can really see every area has been touched. And now I'm running out of excuses and things to do instead of tackling the crank pulley. I really don't want to do it. You know what? Now would be a great time to remind you guys to support us. If you haven't already followed our channel, please do, because that really does help us grow. And if this content has been engaging to you, you've been excited to see more progress on this car, and especially if you want to follow along on the build and see this thing become a tire slaying machine, definitely hit that subscribe button. Definitely give this video a thumbs up, it'll help more people see it, and drop a comment below. It all feeds the algorithm, it really helps us grow the channel, and I guess I'm now truly out of excuses, and I have to do the crank pulley. Man, the amount of sand and crap built up inside that pulley is interesting. Anyway, it looks like it's one pretty large bolt right in the middle. Doesn't look like it has secondary bolts holding this outer piece on, so it does look like this is all one assembly. So I'm going to figure out what size socket to use, and yeah, I guess we're on to it. I think I need to figure out how to lock the crankshaft in place. Most likely it's just going to try and turn the engine over when I turn this. Well, it's bigger than a 23. It's a 24. And you're definitely going to want a half-inch drive for this. So predictably, it's just basically turning the crank. There is one consideration as well, which is when you're pulling the cylinder heads, I believe you're supposed to get it to top dead center on cylinder 1. I'm going to do a little bit of research, but essentially, like most things, it helps to have a solid mark where you exactly know where the engine's set at, so when you put it all back together, you can reliably time everything. I bought the kit to lock the cams and everything like that, and if memory serves, there should be a tool in there, I think, to lock the crank. So I'm going to do a little research and basically just see how people go about doing that. If it's whether, you know, using one of these tools, or if there's some other thing that they do to hold it in place while cracking that bolt, because crank bolts are just always crazy, crazy tight. And then, yeah, pretty much walking you through the kit a little bit. From what I understand, you basically want to lock the bottom end and the cylinder heads kind of in time, if I'm correct. I believe that's how it all works. So we'll find out together, and yeah, right now I'm going to try and figure out what's going on with that crank. So I'm actually going to sign off for the day, because that's a couple of hurdles that I can't really overcome right now. I'm going to do a bit of research about locking the bottom end in place. And like I said, definitely subscribe, because this adventure is just getting better.